Welcome to the opening of our 25th summer series. Thank you, John, for leading singing, and Todd for leading our minds in prayer. A few announcements before we dismiss the children. Among those who are sick, Carolyn Kimball is in Memorial. In Selby is Mary Lou Crumley, that's Connie Hauser's mother. In Youngstown is Raymond Williams, that's Catherine Venom's brother, and he is dealing with double pneumonia. Earl Schramm and Mary Wharton were both in the hospital, and we're happy that they're now both out. Andrea Atkins came forward Sunday asking for the congregation's prayers and helping her. We applaud Andrea in recognizing her need and reaching out to her fellow brothers and sisters. We extend our sympathy to the family of Esther Abbott. That's Ruth Forshey's aunt. Memorial services are not complete at this time. A reminder of VBS Kids Day, that will be this coming Tuesday, or next Tuesday. Registration forms are still available in the office, and there are still invitations and flyers available in the lobby. So for our children, from ages 2 up through 6th grade, you are dismissed to class. That's going to be upstairs, and the adults remain. Well, again, welcome to everyone. This is the opening of our Wednesday night summer series. As I mentioned, this is our 25th year of presenting this series. And this year, our theme and what we will look at is, as Christians, how do we deal with values held by modern culture? This evening, we welcome Dan Kessinger. He's a veteran of our series. Dan is a graduate of Ohio Valley University and is currently preaching for the Mount Alto congregation in Jackson County. Additionally, Dan is teaching at the West Virginia School of Preaching and is looking forward to expanding his work there this fall, taking on a larger teaching role and assisting with recruiting. Dan is married to Mary Amy, and they have 2 sons. Their older son, DJ, will graduate from the West Virginia School of Preaching in a few weeks, so perhaps somebody we can line up in the future, fill in for Dan some year. And their younger son, Thomas, who's with him this evening, recently graduated from high school, and he will be starting at Marietta College this fall. So Dan's topic for this evening kind of kicks off and introduces our theme for the summer, and his topic is Christianity Confronts Modern Culture.
Can't remember the last time I've been introduced without some insults. Usually happens. It's what I come to expect. Maybe you can give me some at the end of the lesson. I'm sure it'll be appropriate at that time. I am very happy to see all of you. Get to see some faces I haven't seen for a while. I have quite the task ahead because what I have to do, this is a general overview of the topic as I see it that you're going to be dealing with through Wednesdays this summer. And somehow or another, I need to communicate some things to you along the way. One of those things is that I'm not just the angry, aging fellow yelling to the kids, "Get off my lawn." There's always that tendency. I never wanted to be that guy. And the subject matter may lend itself to sounding just a little bit gripey tonight. So be it. We are at a point in my judgment that the United States of America has never been before. I decided to open with the provocative picture that you see. The day that the White House became the gay house. You remember that? I could have shown you a couple other pictures, one with people holding up letters that spelled "Love Wins." Love wins. the demons celebrated that day. I have no doubt in my mind the angels of the devil were happy with us. Now, I'm not going to go too deeply into this topic because others have been assigned it. This is a general look. Randy Baker's going to talk to you about confronting the modern culture of sexuality, and I presume he's going to talk about some of the changes versus God's standards. I want to begin by considering what the Bible tells us in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 through 12. There's a great contrast here. The contrast is between the nature of God and the nature of all those things that he has made, including culture. It reads, "And thou, Lord, at the beginning laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou remainest." Incidentally, meant to change all this. You're going to have to put up, those of you not used to old King James language, you're just going to have to put up with it tonight. I meant to change that over and forgot it. So, anyway, they shall perish, but thou remainest. And they shall wax old as doth a garment, and as a vesture shalt thou fold them up, and they shall be changed, but thou art the same, and thy years shall not fail. The contrast is here between things that we think of as fairly permanent, things like the heavens, the outer space, and the earth, those seem to be pretty permanent, but through the eyes of God, they're like an old garment that eventually you'll wear out, and if you're like I am, you still don't throw it away. Eventually your wife throws it away when you're not looking. But it's gone, and here you still are. That's the contrast between the God of this universe and the things that he has created. So we are in, I don't know what you'd call it. Could you call it a moral free fall? I'm not really sure how to describe it anymore. I mean, going all the way back to the 70s, there were some people who predicted that not only would you see change, but what was unique about this particular time period, and actually it has proved true, is the acceleration of change. So again, you ask, exactly how did we get here? For just a couple of moments, I'm going to talk to the youngest among us for just a moment, because it's something that I do see, and again, I'm being the old man yelling, "Get off my lawn" again, but that's all right. But I want you to understand something about how you're being influenced by media. And I'm not just talking about mass media, I'm also talking about social media. One of the unique features of all the various kinds of social media that the young people are involved in is what's been described as an echo chamber effect. Well, what's that mean? It means that people say things to people of like mind and get affirmation about those things that they're saying. And so they are never really confronting, and especially I'm talking about those who are devaluing morality in America. They have never even heard any, and if they do hear anything, they immediately dismiss the person. I know what I'm talking about on this. This isn't just wild speculation. A few years ago, I found myself in a discussion with a gentleman on Facebook. Something had been said that he commented to me about. I don't even remember what it was that started the discussion. Well, here was what was interesting. I knew him as a musician, slightly. And I didn't know he had a husband. And he didn't know I was a preacher. And actually, you may think what ensued was a virtual fist fight, and it really wasn't. In fact, he said to me, I shouldn't have even said those things now that I know you're a minister. And I said, that doesn't make any difference, and you haven't bothered me by the things that you've said. We were having an objective discussion. Here is what's right. Here's what's wrong. Now, he was entirely mistaken, but I assure you, it was a gentlemanly and polite and plain discussion about what I believe the Bible taught about his lifestyle, and he didn't really take offense. And then a 20-something stepped in and proceeded to tell me what an extraordinarily bad human being I was. Now, here's the punchline. He was a member of the church. He said, "You've been unkind to this man." It ended with him saying, ironically, "I hope you die in a fire." I don't know where you come from. I consider that to be somewhat unkind. But it was supposedly a member of the Lord's church who took this extraordinarily immoral viewpoint. He couldn't even have a decent discussion about it. And I'm telling you, that's not the exception. That's the rule. How did we get here? How did we get to a point where people are saying love wins? When gay marriage not just made the law in America, but basically that law said it cannot be illegal anywhere, anytime. How do we get to the point where I meet people seemingly on a daily basis? And again, for those of you my age and older, you may not be aware of this, but I'm here to tell you the rules about marriage have really changed a great deal. I rarely meet a 20-something who isn't living with someone. Rarely. Now, this is an exaggeration, but not too much. All of them are. It's the vast majority. In fact, the only people who seem to be interested in getting married are same-sex couples. In Parkersburg, over the last several weeks, I've been kind of keeping track. You've been following the anti-discrimination ordinance? Yeah. Maybe that seems innocuous to you. Maybe it doesn't seem like a big deal. Until a friend of mine, his wife and his kids were in the middle of Charleston last summer, and here in the park, they have such an ordinance, and there was some sort of a celebration going on, and it involved the throwing of water balloons in some sort of a game, and here goes this 300-pound man in a sundress and very large high-heeled shoes going, "Ooh, ooh," trotting along. His kids had to see that. And over in Parkersburg, they think that their kids have to see that, and I'm sure there are plenty of folks in your community who think your kids need to be exposed to that sort of thing. And of all things, pick up the paper and see a member of the church standing before that gathering telling them why they needed such an ordinance. He ought to be ashamed of himself. Meanwhile, heaven is unchanged. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 8, the Bible reads, "Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever." You know, I don't want to keep ringing the same bell and singing the same note all the way through this, but I think it's a great illustration. Another friend of mine, another musician, he brought up the topic with me about it one day. He's not a member of the church. He's a Roman Catholic. But I just couldn't have phrased this any better than he did. And he's a little younger than I, but he said, "You know, my friends tell me, now we know that this is okay." And he said to me, what I said to this person who said that, I said, "Do you really think that God up in heaven is looking down at the earth and said, you know, I've had it wrong all these years. These little puny humans the last 50 years or so on this nation, the United States of America, they've set me straight now. Now I get it." Do you really think that's what's going on? And my friend may not know some things, but I think that he does know the nature of God at the very least. He's not changed with the winds. He's not changed with culture. Now, for our time tonight, and I need to be careful of it because, again, the nature of the topic as it's been given to me means I can go just about anywhere with this, and I'll try to be as efficient with our time as possible. And so what I'd like to do first is observe this, because I think this will help us not only in our study of this tonight, but in your study of this topic throughout this summer series. Number one, it's not just modern culture that Christianity confronts. The first thing we need to get through our heads is Christianity confronts everything. It confronted ancient culture. It confronts modern culture. Literally, Christianity is a confrontation. You ever see the bumper stickers, coexist? Do like this if you've seen them. Okay, I don't see a lot of that. All right, if you ever see a coexist, look carefully. It says coexist. It's spelled out with various symbols, some representing Judaism, some Islam, some, I don't remember what all, Christianity is in there somewhere. I think the T is a cross. But what this means is all the religions of the world need to coexist. Now, if by coexist we mean don't kill one another, I'm on board. But we need to understand something. Christianity was never built to coexist. If we mean signing off on those other world religions. It just simply cannot be. Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 10, verse 34. He said, "Think not that I came to bring peace on the earth. I came not to bring peace, but a sword." And he goes ahead and says, this is where the sword is. Not that Jesus was for division, but he did say, because of what I'm teaching, there are going to be families separated. There's always going to be a confrontation. That is the nature of Christianity. And again, not just modern culture, but let's go back to ancient culture as well. See, we have this tendency, and sometimes I think it's just an excuse that we like to use, where we think that culture is the explanation for everything. Well, let's consult Paul in Acts chapter 17 as he is confronted with the culture of Athens, Greece. It was a religious question, but it was also a cultural question. If you read the previous verses to verses 22 and 23, you find that there were a couple of dominant philosophies, and the people believed those and loved those and practiced those. The two that are named are the Epicureans, who kind of taught what the United States dominant culture is, which is whatever makes you happy, that's what you ought to do. And then there were the Stoics, who believed that kind of whatever came your way was going to happen. That was the culture. What's Paul do? "You men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you're too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore you ignorantly worship. Him declare I unto you." Now, if you read that through the next 12 or 14 verses or so, you're going to find all the way through verse 31. I guess that's only 10 verses. All the way through verse 31, Paul is unyielding and unbending as he reveals a religion that confronted and contradicted that culture. Number two, Christianity confronts religions directly. It's become popular for us to think that because of culture, various other religions might be just as good for the people who are in those places and doing those things. And in Acts chapter 4 and verse 12, here's Peter and John. "Neither is there salvation in any other, for there's no other name under heaven given among men whereby you must be saved." That leaves absolutely no room for other religions. Oh, so therefore we should march on them, destroy them, kill them, do away with them. That's not what Christianity does. Christianity seeks to convert them. But make no mistake about it. The nice people of the world who are in other religions are lost, or else Christianity isn't really true, because it was designed, its nature is, it is exclusive. So the idea of religious error, number 3, is also a confrontation of Christianity. By religious error, I mean even those who say, "I believe in Christ," nonetheless, what they believe, what they teach is not in harmony with the Bible. Again, there is no room for coexistence. So Paul, when preaching to the Ephesian elders in Acts chapter 20, he warns them. He said, "I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them." That's in verses 29 and 30. So the model that says coexist, again, if we mean be peaceful, if we mean be kind, absolutely. But if we're leaving room for doubt that there is salvation through any other means, that's not what this book is teaching. This book is not a cultural phenomenon. The truth is, books that are the product of cultural phenomenon tend to fade away as soon as that culture is replaced by another. Let's think for a moment and consider the nature of Jesus, and especially as he confronted the culture of his day. You know, if you think about it, throughout the ministry of Jesus, it was a history of one confrontation after another. I already told you that when he sent the disciples on the limited commission, that he made it very plain. I'm not sending you out to make friends. I'm sending you out to tell the truth, and that's going to cause some division. Does that mean they weren't to be kind and friendly? Not at all. But the result was not going to be that everyone we meet likes us. That's a hard thing for some of us to get through our heads. I started to say, I really like it when people like me, but that's a dumb statement. I've never met anybody who set out in life to have as many people dislike them as they could. I've met some people that you wondered if that wasn't what they were after. But I don't really think that was their goal. Everybody likes for people to like them. Me too. And the problem is, if we have real standards, real ethics, real morals, it's tough to do. A few years ago, I got to thinking about, was prompted by somebody else's thinking, incidentally, this wasn't original with me, but about the concept of a false Christ. You know, we read of Matthew 24 and verses 23 and 24, Jesus warned that there'd be false Christs coming. Now, he was talking about the period between his life and AD 70, pretty clearly in the context there. But what's been interesting about that to me is to see over the years how many false Christs have come and gone. You know, sometimes people will show up on this earth. They want to have a following, so they claim to be Jesus Christ. Sun Myung Moon claimed to be the Messiah. Charles Manson claimed to be the Messiah. David Koresh claimed to be Jesus Christ. That's pretty bold and pretty specific. And pretty clearly by the moral fiber of the three examples I've given you, they clearly were not. But what's even more interesting than that to me is how many false Christs there are out there even today. And I don't mean real people. I don't mean real false messiahs. I mean false versions of the real Jesus. It's interesting how many of them there are. There's one that I call, and you may not like the terminology, but I think it's the most efficient way to describe him. There's the liberal Christ. You say, what's a liberal Christ? Well, he never says anything to anybody condemning. The only thing he knows how to do is love. And everybody is acceptable doing whatever it is that they please to do. The liberal Christ doesn't believe that there are any bottom lines on morality. He sounds a lot more like one of the Beatles than he does Jesus. He just goes around singing, "All you need is love." And when you read the Bible, the false Christ turns out to be a figment of people's imagination. Let's see how. All right, what about this idea there's no bottom line in morality? Well, it's interesting. There was somebody in the New Testament who believed that, who didn't believe there was any such thing as truth, or that you couldn't know truth, and that truth wasn't all the truth all the time. And in John chapter 18, verse 38, he said that, but it wasn't Jesus, it was Pilate, the man who murdered him. Jesus talked about truth in John 18, verse 37. Pilate says, "Oh, what is truth? I can't know the truth. You can't know the truth. We can't know the truth." That was his way of avoiding his responsibility. It wasn't Jesus who said there's no bottom line, there's no truth, or that truth is different for various people. A few years ago, I read an interview with newsman Tom Brokaw. And in this interview, he was asked, what's the most important thing you learned in your years as a newsman? And I'm sorry, it wasn't Brokaw, it was Jennings, Peter Jennings. But anyway, Jennings said, well, I have learned that there is no one truth on the story. There are sometimes multiple truths. And I read that and I scratched my head and I thought, now that statement he just made, does he want me to believe that's true, or should I look at it and say that's both true and not true at the same time, Mr. Jennings? That's true for me, but not true for somebody else, Mr. Jennings. Or didn't he really think that we all ought to believe that what he said was true? Isn't that strange? So what he says is either true or false, and it's definitely true. But what other people say, maybe yes, maybe no, maybe both at the same time. There's not a verse in the Bible that'll support that kind of thinking. But that's exactly one of the reasons why we've gotten where we are, because we have come to believe there is no bottom line. It's called objective truth, and the Bible teaches it and Jesus spoke it. What about the liberal Christ saying, as many people believe that he did, the only real sin in the world is condemned sin? Haven't you heard people say that? I have. People know one verse in the Bible. I've found it's likely to be Matthew 7:1, judge not that you be not judged. And they think that Jesus went around just saying that to everybody. Oh, we can't judge. Oh, I don't know what's right or what's wrong. Oh, is that what he said, really? Even at the moment when he was forgiving a woman who was taken in adultery and he was preventing her stoning, listen to how the exchange ends when he said, no man condemned you, no man, Lord. Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Did he leave any doubt so far as her violation and what she needed to do from that point forward? Well, no, he didn't. There's a difference between forgiveness and not being able to tell what's right and wrong. The good news is the Bible teaches forgiveness. That means no matter what you've done, no matter what I've done, we can seek and receive God's forgiveness. But we won't get there as long as we continue to gloss over it and pretend that we're fine and dandy just the way that we are. That's the words of the liberal Christ. That's not the real one. The liberal Christ says things like that. Let's go on, because of time, to the ecumenical Christ. The ecumenical Christ, again, for want of a better term, is the one who says, oh, you can go to heaven any church you want, any way you want. A lot of people believe in the ecumenical Christ. The ecumenical Christ says it doesn't matter what you do, it just matters whether you love God or not. Here's what the real one said, John 14, verse 15. If you love me, keep my commandments. The ecumenical Christ says to all the people in all the denominations, you're fine right where you are. There are many paths to glory. And the real one said in Matthew 7, verses 13 and 14, enter ye in at the straight gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth unto destruction. Many there be that go in thereat. Because straight is the gate and narrow is the way that leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. The ecumenical Christ says, there are many churches, all of which are acceptable to God. They are all mine. Here's what the real one said to the Apostle Peter in Matthew 16, verse 18. I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my, is it churches? Let me check. Nope. Still reads the same way. He didn't say I'm going to build my churches. He said I will build my church. And it's still the truth. No, the ecumenical Christ isn't a real Christ. It's something that people make up to feel better about where they are. I want to consider with you as well, consider the servants of God. And again, my biggest obstacle here was trying to figure out what to leave out. We could have just gone here and just left it there. Let's just look at what God's people have done over the years when confronting culture. Let's see how they behaved and see if this looks anything like what we're being encouraged to do. I just decided to give you 4 quick examples. The first of which is Moses. Let's think about Moses and the culture of Egypt. Now, where was Moses? He was in Egypt. Dominant kingdom in the entire world at that point. Richest kingdom, best educated. And Moses was at the top of the heap. He was right in the middle of their culture. When at 40 years old, he made a decision. And the decision was that he would defend an Israelite against the Egyptians. That was counterculture. Here's how the Hebrews writer describes it in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 26. Moses, when he was come of years, refused to be called, by faith Moses, when he was come of years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasure of sin for a season. And he esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasure of Egypt, because he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. Now, here's the question. Was this just a clash of cultures? The one I skipped over a little bit ago, I'll allude to it now. Back in John 4:22, Jesus condemned an entire culture. That was the Samaritan woman at the well. Is this just a clash of culture? Well, Jesus said, no, this isn't just one culture versus another. This is that which is correct, that which is according to God's will versus this harmful problem in this culture. What Moses did was not just to defend his family's, his extended family and their welfare. What he did, according to the Hebrews writer, was done by what? Done by faith. It means that the culture of Egypt was wrong, and he defied it. Let's skip forward a few hundred years to Elijah. Well, Elijah is perhaps the most countercultural person that I've ever read about in the Bible. You might attribute that to his being, I don't know, eccentric. And I think he was, by the way. Is that what defines him? Is that what explains him? If so, you really have a hard time explaining why he was selected in Matthew chapter 17 to appear along with Moses and Jesus, and he was representative of the prophets. The real reason was he was the most prophet-like prophet there was, meaning he was the most countercultural. Because there's one thing you're going to see if you ever spend time studying the prophets, and that is they were bucking the tide. The worse things were in Israel, the more prophets God called to prophesy. He may have had some prophets who prophesied during times of faithfulness. We just don't read much about them. Usually it was at times like this in America, times when the prophets of the world by the prophets of the world, I mean the preachers of the world, are mostly interested in telling people, you're doing fine. Things are good. I don't want you to feel bad. Never read of a prophet in the Bible who had that kind of message. There's a fellow down in Houston that has a church of about 20,000 people by telling them that. But he's about as unprophet-like a prophet as I've ever heard of. No, Elijah is confronted by Ahab, husband of Jezebel, worshiper of Baal, killer of children, murderer of prophets. Ahab thought that he would intimidate Elijah in 1 Kings 18 when he said, "You're the troubler of Israel." Elijah said, "It's not I troubling Israel, it's you and your wife and your sins." He's a little more plain than that with his language. But here was the culture of Israel under Ahab and Jezebel. It was polytheistic. It was sensual. And here was Elijah in the wilderness, being called to town only once in a great while in order to pronounce a condemnation upon the culture. And if you skip forward a few chapters, here's another prophet who lived at the same time by the name of Micaiah. Chapter 22 of 1 Kings is all we know about Micaiah. But he was cut from the same cloth. He was called in to give a prediction. And all of the prophets who were prophets for sale had told the two kings, go into battle. God's given you the victory. One of them even had visual aids. He had a suit like a bull. I'm serious. He made iron horns and the whole thing. And he said, like this, are you going to push the Syrians around? He went back and forth with those silly iron horns. And they asked Micaiah, what do you say? Micaiah said, oh, go into victory. Go into battle. God will give you the victory. He must have said it very sarcastically, because the king said, how many times have I told you not to lie but to speak the truth? Of course, the king had never said that, but that's another story. And he said, I'll tell you what I saw. I saw Israel scattered like sheep before the Syrians. I saw you dead after this battle. God said he wanted you dead. This, by the way, was a story that he told. This didn't actually happen. He said, God said, how am I going to kill Ahab? And one of the spirits said, I'll go and be a lying spirit in the voice of the prophets. And that's what's happened here today. Zedekiah is still standing there with his bull costume and his iron horns on. He slapped Micaiah. Said, which way did the spirit go when it left me? The king said, throw him into prison, feed him only bread and water till I come back. Micaiah said, evidently you didn't hear me. You're not coming back. And he didn't. I want to mention John the Baptist in the New Testament for a couple of reasons. One is, of all the people that followed Elijah, he was the most Elijah-like of the prophets. And once again, he was about as countercultural as anything could be. Consider him and the culture of Herod. In fact, in Matthew chapter 14, we learn that John is in jail awaiting what would eventually be his execution. And the Bible says, for Herod had seized John and bound him and put him into prison for Herodias, his wife's sake. Or not his wife, excuse me, his brother Philip's wife. That was the problem. For John had said unto him, it's not lawful for thee to have her. Here would have been a perfect opportunity for John to have compromised not his own values, but the values of God and the sanctity of marriage. This would have been a perfect opportunity for him to go along to get along, and he didn't do it. Now, maybe after all these examples, you're thinking, well, do I have to live in the wilderness? Do I have to behave as Micaiah did? And, not everybody has to be an Elijah. Not everybody has to be a Micaiah. My goal tonight, as much as anything else, because I don't think that I can recover the ground that has been lost in America with her morals and values, and I don't know that if I can recover the ground that's been lost in the church, as we've also, hopefully to a lesser extent, compromised our values by conformity. But what I can do is this. I can impress upon your minds, I can impress upon you that Christianity is intended to transcend culture. And let me add to that, it is designed to change it. Maybe you're a very young person tonight. Maybe you're looking forward in your life expectancy. You're going to see 50, maybe even 60 years more of your life. You wonder what's going to happen, what's going to change. I don't have the answers for that. I do know the nature of Christianity is that it cannot conform, that it must transcend, and that ideally it can change the culture. I wonder what would have happened 50 years ago or 40 or 30 if everyone who believed the right things about morality in America had said more. I really do. We have spent so much time reassuring the enemies of God that it's not personal. You hear me? We spend so much time apologizing for truth that we forgot to tell the truth. And it needs to be told. I don't like hurting people's feelings. I already told you I like for people to like me. But I've got to tell the truth. Why? Because of the Bible concept of holiness. You know what holiness is? It's separation. It's a particular kind of separation. It's a separation under God's terms. But it's found throughout the Old Testament, most prominently in the book of Leviticus. But that concept is carried over into the New. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 14, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. So it means we need to make a commitment, if you're a Christian tonight, be different, not for difference sake. Be unique. Be God's possession. Culture comes and goes. The way it's stated in Romans chapter 12 and verse 2 is conformity, and that's the word that he used, be not conformed. That conformity is unacceptable. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. See, culture, because it changes, has a tendency with us to change us with it. It bends, it shapes, and eventually it warps. Eventually we get to the point where, like those of Isaiah's day, in Isaiah 5 and verse 20, we end up saying exactly the opposite of what God did, endorsing exactly the opposite of what God endorses, and condemning only those who dare to condemn. Or as Isaiah put it, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. Isn't that what we're doing in America today? Who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Love wins. You mean that which God called wickedness wins. That's not love. Who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. And then there's something that shapes and eventually warps. And then there's something that stands. That which stands is the doctrine of Christ. Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27, Jesus concluded the Sermon on the Mount by saying, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house upon a rock, and the rains descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat upon that rock, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. I'm going to pause at this point. We do have the young ones coming back, or should I just immediately go into? Because I have 5 till. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a second to give them a chance to get in here, and then we'll have the invitation then. Is that okay? Okay, all right. That was important information for me. Okay. I guess I should have listened closer when you were explaining that to me. I do want to say this at the close of this part of the lesson. You all have been superb so far as listening. I've had to say some things that kind of make my gut clench, to be honest with you. I don't like having to say those things to people. I have to. I hope you understand that. I hope you take it seriously. I know that over the course of this summer series, you're going to be talking about some topics that probably lend themselves quite readily to what I'm about to say. And I'm sure you'll be given some more details regarding those things. But one of the things that I was talking to you a little while ago wasn't about necessarily morality and ethics and those kinds of things, but more religion related. You know, if I were making the rules, I think I would have made them different. There's a lot of people that I know who are really nice people, really good neighbors, good friends, not Christians. Some of them believe they are. Well, how could that be? Somebody believes he or she is a Christian and isn't. Well, once again, we're face to face with this idea of an objective truth. You see, Jesus said, "He that believes and is baptized shall be saved." And so some of my friends will say, well, I believe that you're saved by faith only, and if you want to be baptized later, you can. And Jesus didn't say, "He that believes and is saved shall be baptized." And that's the problem. He said, "He that believes and is baptized shall be saved." Now, the reason I explain it to you just like this is because we're about to sing a song of invitation that if you're not a Christian tonight, this is the pattern of obedience that you need to become submissive to. This is what you need to do. And the reason I explained it to you that way was so that we would all understand that's not because that's what I say. That's not because that's what the church says. It's because that's what Jesus said. Well, in our church we say this, that's cultural. Doesn't matter what my church says, it matters what this book says. So if you're not a Christian tonight, we're going to sing this song in order to encourage you, make that time opportune for you to become obedient to Christ. If you're outside